This past Sunday, Father McShane announcing a 2-week suspension on all in-person activities on campus, and that comes in conjunction with the regulations set by Governor Andrew Cuomo. And that suspension means a pause on everything, and that includes athletic activities. No games, no practices, no team workouts, and much more. And obviously that drastically affects the seasons and the lives of many of these student athletes, especially women's basketball, who happens to be in the midst of one of their better seasons, not in recent memory, but over these last 10 years. It's one of their better seasons lately. They're 11-3 overall, 8-2 in the A10. They are top 70 in the net right now, so an at-large bid is still in the realm of possibility for the NCAA tournament. And Caitlin Downey, like you mentioned earlier, Jimmy, has made a petition to try to let them play the remainder of their schedule on the road, finish out their season. And the Atlantic 10 tournament for them did get moved back a week. So this pause/suspension is due to end on Sunday, February 28th. However, with the new guidelines that have been set by Cuomo, which were announced yesterday, if cases go above 5%, and they are above 5% when Sunday comes around, and that would be next Sunday, there will be another 2-week pause. But guys, need to hear your thoughts on this. Overall, obviously a frustrating time for all athletes and everyone on campus, given the circumstances, especially when you consider women's basketball is yet to have a positive test this season and over 1,400 negative tests. Jimmy, I'll start with you. Your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I might get a little long-winded here, so forgive me. But we all got the email from Father McShane. I got it on Sunday morning. Don't know when you guys did. Probably sometime around there. He wrote, "We take these measures reluctantly, but we believe pausing activities at Rose Hill offers us our best chance to reduce the spread of COVID-19 and resume a more normal campus routine for the rest of the spring semester." I find that language slightly perplexing, to be honest, because when Fordham hit 100 cases, there's not really a lot the school can do. This is a New York State guideline. It's very clearly laid out. It has since been amended, as you pointed out, Jackson, yesterday. But there's not really a choice for Fordham in the matter. Once they hit 100, they have to stop everything. And that's what they did, and that's what they had to do. Just going into a little further detail with this Governor Cuomo guideline that he released yesterday, if colleges and universities are testing at least 25% of total on-campus students, faculty, and staff weekly, they will not be required to go on pause unless the positivity rate exceeds 5%. Now, I would need to see the numbers on that because I'm not entirely sure that Fordham is hitting that threshold. You know what I'm saying? If I look at the total test numbers, and I had it up before and I closed it, I don't know why. I'll read the exact number, but it's somewhere close to 1,500 people have been tested in Rose Hill in the last 2 weeks. So if you just say theoretically divide that in half, okay, so the total number 4,000. So divide that in half, 2,000 people being tested a week. Is that 25% of the total on-campus figure? I don't know. It might be, but again, I'm not entirely sure. So we're not 100% sure if this applies to Fordham. Even then, the positivity rate all week has been going up. Unfortunately, it was at about 3% when the pause actually happened. It's up to about 4.6% now. I got a quick preview of the numbers on the New York State dashboard. By my math, the positivity rate's going to go up today. Whether or not it hits 5% is going to be really close. Now let's get into the athletics part of this. It's obviously a huge bummer for the team. They had been playing their best basketball of the season, and they hit a pause where they not only can't play, can't even practice. And that's the real killer in addition to losing the games. Caitlin Downey, as you said, has started a petition. The team would, if this were to go through, basically have to live out of a suitcase for a couple of weeks, which it seems like they're willing to do. If they're willing to do that and the coaches are fine with it, then, hey, more power to them. If that leads to, the rest of the season being played in a timely fashion, then you know what? Go ahead, do that. Where I do think this gets even more depressing, I think, for the team is that one of the few things we know about the Fordham COVID outbreak, and we don't know a lot, but what we do know is that it's not being started by the sports teams, and especially not the women's basketball team. They have not had a positive test out of 1,400 since last August. And, the university, I think, could do a better job in terms of transparency and telling us where the outbreak's coming from. Is it, happening in the dorms? Is it happening with off-campus activities? What exactly is leading to this, to the best of their knowledge? But one of the few things we know is that the sports teams have really, by and large, done a great job of following the protocols. I saw only 18 positive tests, I think, was the total number since the testing regimen has started, which is outstanding, all things considered. When you look at the positivity rate in the Bronx, the positivity rate at Fordham, that's outstanding. So it's a real bummer. The problem is there's not a whole lot that can be done other than really what Caitlin Downey did, which is start a petition and say, hey, we're willing to play the rest of the year on the road if that's what we have to do. But we'll see what winds up happening. The new guideline, in theory, helps Fordham's chances here. But on the other hand, the positivity rate's not going down at Fordham. It's going up. So hopefully they can get that under control. But yeah, it's a bummer.
I think it's quite outrageous what has happened, to be quite honest. And 18 positive tests amongst the entire student athlete body since this entire thing has started, and they're getting tested 3 times a week. To force them to pause into this situation, especially this late in the season, when they have a chance to do something very special. I mean, you look at this team. You have the surefire player of the year in Anna DeWolf. You have a team that could potentially be in the realm of possibility and in the realm of discussion for an at-large bid. I mean, you look at the first 4 teams out right now on ESPN.com when it comes to the field of 68. One of those teams is Villanova, who is only 1 spot ahead of Fordham in the net rankings right now. So, like, if Fordham runs the table and loses in the A-10 championship, there is still a possibility this team could get an at-large bid in the NCAA tournament. When was the last time you could say that about a Fordham team? That would be a pretty damn cool accomplishment. So I think shame on Governor Cuomo, who, by the way, has written a book about how he defeated COVID through all of this and has been quite arrogant through the process to make these guidelines surrounding the athletes that really don't have any involvement in the positive testing. And I mentioned it before, the women's basketball team specifically has had over 1,400 negative tests since they've started. And this testing goes back all the way to September. So, and perhaps even further beyond that. So I think it's really ridiculous to have them punished for this. And listen, I'm not saying that Fordham should go blameless in all of this, because I know from talking to some of the players that Father McShane really has shown no willingness to talk to them, and not only to them, but the coaches in this process. And they have done a lot. I mean, you look at the petition, it's exploded, and credit to them, because I think it puts a really good light on the program in the national sphere, because they're being done wrong in this process. There's no other way to say it. They're getting screwed in this entire thing because they have done everything right and have been completely brushed aside, and it seems like no one's willing to cooperate with them. And that's the thing that I think I would be most frustrated about if I was them, because they've done everything right. We knew that Fordham really playing sports has been a complete money grab in the NCAA, and the fact that they find themselves in this position now without doing anything wrong here is ridiculous. And it goes to all the athletic teams on campus. I mean, baseball and softball haven't played games in nearly 2 years. You have the men's basketball team, who has gone through a lot in terms of dealing with COVID, and now they're in a spot where they can finally finish out their season, and they're not able to do so. The athletes have a right to be really frustrated here, because I think there's a lot of blame to go around, but it starts with Governor Cuomo for these ridiculous regulations that he has set forward. And I just think that they're being done completely wrong here. And Nick, we have you back now.
What to me is very frustrating is the lack of consistency from the powers that are making these decisions, whether that be Fordham administration or pretty more broadly the governor's office. And that's really where most of these things are coming from and stemming from. And I just don't know that I really understand why last week it wasn't safe to operate with more than 200 positive tests, and now it is if it's a less than 5% positivity rate. And I understand that this is uncharted territory and we're making things up as we go along, just out of a reactionary basis on the way that we are dealing with this. So I understand that. I get that. But what we need to do is create some consistency. This is something that's been around for a year now. We have a pretty good understanding of what we are up against and what we are dealing with regard to this virus. So now it is about having some consistency with the way that we operate. And that to me is the most frustrating thing with, okay, it's not safe, but it is safe. And we're going to try and say that it's safe as long as this doesn't get too out of hand and pick one. And what is it? I will say that in the defense of Father McShane, he is going to want to put the university in a position to be vaccinated. Okay. And that is going to involve having a good relationship with the government. So if you go at them and say, I don't like the way that this is happening for our student athletes, guess who's going to be last in line when vaccinations come around? That's the way the game works. And you can say what you want about that. To me, there are a whole number of issues that are messed up about the way that that works, but I'm just telling you that's the reality. So that to me is also the frustrating part, where I think that our administration is in a position where they can't really fight back. It's got to come from the players who aren't necessarily accountable to what happens up top with the university. But the thing for me overarchingly that is very apparent is that no matter what happens, the way that athletics operate will not affect the rest of the campus at large with the way things have been going and currently operating. And that is the most frustrating thing, because it's not necessarily that the women's basketball team has a sterling record of 0 positive tests in 1,400 cases, as great as that is. To me, even if they were to have a positive test, they would catch it. They understand, they see the positive test, those who administer these things, and then the program gets shut down because you're not allowed to compete. There is no transmission that transpires because women's basketball is still playing. It won't happen. So that to me is the most frustrating thing. Now, if it becomes an issue at some point where there is a positive test, then you can reevaluate and say how long do we need to sit out? What does the outbreak look like? And what does the scope of the team appear to be? But that to me is the biggest thing, where you're just not putting anyone else other than those who are already accepting the risk to play to begin with at any additional risk. They're separate. There is a difference between being an athlete and the way that they are operating, being isolating. That's what they're doing. They are not interacting with other people to decrease the chance of a positive test as much as possible. So if they were to even test positive, that will not propagate throughout the rest of the campus because of the way that they are operating. So that to me is the biggest thing. It's not necessarily, we have to make sure our cases are down, or Fordham women's basketball, credit to them. I'm not trying to take away from this fact, but it's not that they have this great reputation necessarily. It's not about that. It's about just logistically, when you look up and down the way that this thing works, it really doesn't matter what their reputation is. It's more, if you think about it, it just will not transmit to the student body because they don't interact. That's the way the thing has gone on for the entire season. So if there is a positive test, things are getting shut down anyway, and then they won't play. But if they are able to operate in a manner in which they're not testing positive, that doesn't affect the rest of the campus, and nobody's going to the games anyway. It's not like there's attendance. So that to me is the most frustrating thing, because these two things just really aren't that related. And yet we want to hit it with a blunt force instrument and say, okay, let's just shut everything down, without really looking into our situations. And on top of all of that, our consistency with those situations are not upstanding. So I think that's where the frustration stems for me. And I'm hoping we can come to a resolution here, because this has been extremely frustrating on a number of levels. And I'm hoping that we can steer the ship in the right direction sooner rather than later.
And if I could just say one more thing here.
Yeah, for sure.
Popping out to a wider level, in addition to athletics, because this is such a wide-ranging shutdown, I think it's necessary to do so. I think there's a lot of reasonable issue you can have looking at a university level as to the transparency and the proactiveness of the response. So at 1:31 p.m. last Saturday, the Fordham Ram, who, full disclosure, I used to be the sports editor of, tweeted out that the Rose Hill campus reached over 100 COVID-19 cases. We didn't get that email that I quoted from until the next morning. And I get that it's a weekend and a 3-day weekend at that. So I understand why the response might not be instantaneous, but within that 19-hour time frame, you had a men's soccer game, a men's basketball game, and I want to make something very clear. I do not blame those teams at all. I would have done the exact same thing if I was in their position. But from a technical standpoint, if you're going to follow the guidelines, once you reach 100 cases, boom, you're done. And you could disagree with the guidelines. I think that's, reasonable. That's fine. But I'm just saying from a letter of the law standpoint, that's what's supposed to happen. But unfortunately, again, and I said it before, we're sitting here guessing. Nobody knows for sure what the cause of this is. And what do we know? We know that the athletics testing regimen has a minuscule positivity rate, and the women's team has a positivity rate of 0. And when that's one of the only things you know about the source of what seems to be a widening outbreak at the university, which might be up to 200 cases in a 2-week span by the time this hits the air, you want to have more information, not less. And I get that there's privacy concerns and there's certain things that you don't want to say, but my God, at some point, tell the public, like, this is what's going on. This is why we need to stop it. Stopping all in-person activities, quote unquote, for a 2-week stretch is kind of a Band-Aid, as much as I hate to say it. Mm-hmm. And, if Instagram is any judge, they haven't stopped all in-person activities, if you know what I mean. So that's kind of the problem here. And again, I'm not trying to tee off on anybody here. This is a tough period for all of us. We are all, it seems, hitting the wall when it comes to this pandemic because we're a year on with this crap and we still haven't gotten it under control. But I do think that there needs to be some degree of transparency to say, this is what's happening. This is what needs to stop. And this is what we need to do to get this under control, because everyone's on edge right now. And I think rightfully so. I'm on edge. I'm sure, Nick, you're on edge in terms of living on campus right now with how many cases there have been in the last couple of weeks. And I think we need the powers that be to tell us, like, hey, this is what we need to do to get through this. You don't need to give us the blow by blow. Just say, hey, this is what is going to be most effective in us getting past this outbreak and getting the virus under control. And unfortunately, that just has not happened so far.
I want to get one last word in here before we move on. And I don't want to sound like I'm blaming the students and not the athletes in this in general. But I think it's the reality of the situation right now. There have been a lot of people on Twitter and on social media. There's been some big backlash against what the women's basketball team has tried to do. A lot arguing preferential treatment and stuff of that nature. But let's hold the phone for a second here. Letting them play would not be preferential treatment under any circumstance, in my opinion. I mean, you look at what they've had to go through to get to this point, and they have taken extra measures by every stretch of the word to make sure that they could have a season, they could stay healthy in this climate. And really, they have played in a bubble the entire season. Like, they haven't really gone out and seen other students. They barely gone home to even see their families. I mean, I know from a basketball perspective, the men's and women's team were only allowed home for about a day or two. And when they had to come back, a lot of them had to quarantine for a few days because they came from states that didn't border New York. And I think to call this preferential treatment is really ignorant to the entire situation that the athletes have been faced with this year, because they have gone through a completely different lifestyle than the normal student has this year. And that's the case every year because of other circumstances. But you look at the situation that they have had to deal with this season. They have to get tested 3 times a week, like I mentioned. They can't go out and do anything for the most part. They're pretty much limited to their rooms, to the gym or their fields, and the workout area. That's pretty much life for a Fordham athlete and any student athlete these days. And it's not the only situation where we're seeing this, where people are arguing, hey, the athlete should play. I mean, I know my sister goes to the University of Virginia. She's home now this week because they went on a 10-day pause because of pretty much the very same situation. But athletics are continuing on at the University of Virginia. And the reason that is because, well, one, obviously there's different state regulations, but two, it's an ACC school. Like, they're playing through all of this. Like, they're going to do everything they can to make sure that they can play, and rightfully so, because the athletes are going through these measures that other students are not going through to do this. So I think my main point behind this whole thing is that I think the student athletes in this situation are being punished for something that they really are not involved in. And listen, some of them have tested positive in this sequence, and that's going to happen because that's the nature of this virus. But at the same time, I think you got to reward some good faith to these people that have been through a lot this year and have gone through a lot and have survived a ton and stayed healthy during this process. And to not reward that, I think, is a indictment on Governor Cuomo for not realizing the context of this situation.